Most people hurt their tomato plants with good intentions. They walk out into the garden, see a jungle of green growth, grab a pair of pruners, and start cutting whatever looks crowded, droopy, or a little wild. It feels productive, it feels tidy, and sometimes it even looks better for a day or two. But cleaner is not always healthier, and shorter is not always more productive. A tomato plant is not a hedge, and it is not a rose bush. If you prune it by appearance instead of by purpose, you can strip away future fruit, slow the plant down, invite sun scald, and spend the rest of the season wondering why you grew a beautiful plant that never really delivered. That is the mistake I want to save you from today, because good tomato pruning is not about cutting more. It is about reading the plant correctly. You are not trying to impose order on chaos. You are trying to recognize which growth helps the plant carry fruit, which growth steals energy at the wrong time, which leaves are doing necessary work, and which parts have become a liability. Once you learn those signs, pruning stops feeling stressful. You do not stand there second-guessing every snip. You look at a plant and understand what it is telling you. A lot of people rely on one lazy rule. They hear, prune all the suckers, or they hear, never prune tomatoes at all. Both rules fail for the same reason. They ignore what kind of tomato you are growing, how far along it is, how much airflow it has, how much support it has, and what the plant is trying to do right now. One rule cannot fit every plant in every bed in every climate. If you follow blanket advice, you may get lucky. But luck is not the same thing as judgment, and judgment is what gives you better yield year after year. So imagine you are standing in front of your tomato plant right now. Before you cut anything, do the first test. Ask one question. Is this plant determinate or indeterminate? That one distinction changes almost everything. Determinate tomatoes grow to a more fixed size and set much of their fruit in a shorter window. Indeterminate tomatoes keep vining, flowering, and fruiting over a longer season. If you prune a determinate plant too hard, you can remove a surprising amount of your harvest without even realizing it. If you never manage an indeterminate plant, it can turn into a tangled, humid mass that is harder to support and more vulnerable to disease. If you do not know which type you planted, the plant itself starts giving clues. A determinate usually stays more compact, develops a more bushy shape, and begins stacking flower clusters in a way that feels concentrated. An indeterminate keeps reaching. It stretches upward, throws out new growth constantly, and acts like it wants another foot of space every time you turn your back. That matters because a compact plant often needs a lighter hand. A vigorous vining plant often benefits from firmer guidance. Right away, you can see pruning is not a ritual. It is a response. Now comes the second test, and this is where many gardeners finally relax. Do not start by looking for what annoys you. Start by looking for what the plant is trying to preserve. Find the main stem, then find the flower clusters, then find the suckers. A sucker is the shoot that forms in the crotch between the main stem and a leaf branch. Left alone, that sucker can become another stem, then another set of leaves, then more flowers, then more fruit. So the question is not, are suckers bad? The question is, does this plant have room, strength, and support for that extra growth? That one shift in thinking changes everything. If the plant is young, strong, well-staked, and you are growing an indeterminate tomato, keeping one or two extra stems may increase production over time. If the plant is already dense, shaded in the middle, lying on itself or growing in a humid climate where leaves stay wet, those same suckers can become the beginning of a disease trap. In other words, a sucker is not the enemy. A poorly placed sucker is the enemy. The sign you are learning to read is not the name of the part. It is the consequence of leaving it there. Here is a simple way to judge it in real time. Look at a sucker and trace the space it will occupy in 2 weeks, not the space it occupies today. That is how experienced growers make better pruning decisions. They do not just see what is there, they see what is coming. A tiny sucker tucked beneath a fruit truss may not look like much this morning, but if it is pointing inward toward the center of the plant, it can soon become a crowded stem that blocks airflow and shades ripening fruit. A similar sucker pointing outward into open space might be worth keeping. Same kind of growth, different outcome. The third test is airflow, and this is where pruning starts paying you back in plant health. Stand close and look into the middle of the plant. Can you see light passing through? Can a breeze move through it after rain or watering? Or does the inside look like damp fabric stuffed into a basket? Tomatoes do not like sitting in stale humidity. When leaves stay crowded and moisture lingers, problems begin creeping in. Fungal issues do not need your permission, they just need the right conditions. Pruning done well helps create a drier, cleaner environment without stripping the plant bare. But there is a trap here too. Some people hear airflow and turn the plant into a skeleton. They remove so many leaves that clusters of fruit end up exposed to brutal afternoon sun. Then the fruit develops sun scald, shoulders bleach out, and the plant gets stressed right when it should be putting its energy into ripening. So do not confuse open with naked. Your goal is not to expose every tomato like a display shelf. Your goal is to reduce congestion while keeping enough leaf cover to shade fruit and feed the plant. Good pruning feels balanced, not severe. Now look at the lower part of the plant. This is the fourth test, and it is one of the easiest wins in the garden. Check for leaves touching the soil or hanging close enough to catch splashback from rain or irrigation. Those are usually the first leaves I remove once the plant is established and growing strongly. Lower leaves near the soil are often the least useful and the most vulnerable. They collect mud, stay damp, and can act like a bridge for disease. Taking off that bottom skirt of tired leaves improves cleanliness without taking away the plant's core productivity. Notice the order there: established and growing strongly. I am not talking about a tiny transplant with 6 leaves trying to find its footing. Early on, every healthy leaf matters. You need that small plant gathering energy and building roots. Heavy pruning too soon can slow it down. Once the stem thickens, the plant has height, and fruiting is underway or close, then removing the lower leaves becomes more useful. Timing matters as much as technique. Even the right cut at the wrong stage can be a bad decision. The fifth test is vigor. When you are deciding whether to prune more or less, look at the plant's strength honestly. Is it dark green, upright, and pushing new growth with confidence? Or is it pale, stalled, and struggling after heat, transplant shock, drought, or disease pressure? A vigorous plant can usually handle selective pruning. A stressed plant may need support more than subtraction. This is where gardeners sometimes make things worse by trying to prune a plant into health. If the plant is already weak, more cutting can mean less photosynthesis, less recovery, and less resilience. You can often read vigor in the stems and leaf posture. Healthy growth usually looks firm and intentional. Stressed growth looks hesitant. Leaves may curl, droop, or lose color. That does not always mean pruning caused the problem, but it should slow your hand. Before you snip more, ask whether the plant needs water consistency, mulch, feeding, shade from extreme heat, or simply time. Pruning is not medicine for every problem. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop cutting and let the plant recover its strength. Now let us talk about the cuts themselves, because even good decisions can be carried out badly. Small suckers are easiest to pinch off with fingers when they are young and tender. Larger stems should be cut cleanly with sharp pruners. Do not tear them halfway and leave ragged wounds. A clean cut heals better. And if you are cutting diseased foliage, keep your tools clean as you move. It does not need to become a complicated operating room routine, but it does need a little care. Sloppy pruning creates stress the plant did not need. There is also a difference between removing a sucker early and removing a thick stem late. Early removal is a small redirect. Late removal is a major loss of leaf area and stored effort. That is why regular observation beats occasional aggressive cleanup every time. When you check plants often, you make tiny decisions. Tiny decisions are easier on the plant and easier on you. Miss 3 weeks, and suddenly every choice feels expensive. The plant has invested heavily in growth, and now you are deciding what to sacrifice. Better to guide than to correct. Another practical sign to watch is fruit load. If a plant already carries a heavy set of tomatoes and you keep allowing endless new stems to form, the plant may spread itself thin. More flowers sound exciting, but more is not always better if the plant cannot support and ripen what it already has. On the other hand, if you remove every new shoot on a healthy, indeterminate plant all season long, you may end up with a narrow vine that produces, but not as generously as it could have with 1 or 2 managed side stems. This is why good pruning lives in the middle ground. Support system matters too. A tomato in a tall, strong trellis can be trained differently than one in a basic cage, and both are different from a plant sprawling on the ground. If your support is limited, your pruning choices need to be stricter. A plant without enough support cannot safely carry endless growth. Stems bend, fruit rests where it should not, and disease pressure rises. Sometimes what looks like a pruning question is really a support question. Instead of asking, should I cut this, ask, can I support this if I keep it? That question saves a lot of confusion. Gardeners often feel guilty about cutting healthy growth, but healthy growth in the wrong place can still become a problem. If a new stem will collapse into the center, rub against another branch, or overload a weak cage, keeping it is not kindness. It is postponing a mess. On the other hand, if you have room, airflow, and solid support, some extra growth can be useful. The plant is not asking for perfection. It is asking for conditions that let it function well. Your job is to read those conditions honestly. Now let us deal with one of the biggest visual mistakes. People often cut the largest leaves first because big leaves feel excessive, but big healthy leaves are solar panels. They are feeding the system. A leaf should not be removed just because it is large or dramatic. Ask better questions. Is it diseased? Is it blocking critical airflow? Is it yellowing and no longer contributing much? Is it pressed into the soil? Is it heavily shading a dense interior where problems are brewing? If the answer is no, that leaf may be doing exactly what the plant needs. By contrast, some of the growth that looks harmless causes more trouble than the obvious big leaf. Thin inward shoots, cross stems, dense clusters of fresh foliage buried in the center. Those are the pieces that often create shade, rubbing, humidity, and confusion. This is why pruning by appearance can mislead you. The flashy parts are not always the wasteful parts. Once you start reading structure instead of size, your cuts become smarter. You stop reacting to what looks messy and start managing what truly interferes. There is also a seasonal rhythm to pruning that makes decisions easier. Early in the season, you are shaping. Mid-season, you are managing airflow, support, and fruiting balance. Late in the season, especially where frost has a predictable arrival, you may become more selective about new flowers and tiny new growth that has little chance of maturing. The plant changes its priorities, and you should too. A cut that makes sense in June may not make sense in August. Again, this is not about memorizing rules. It is about noticing what season the plant is actually in. If your tomatoes are in containers, everything becomes a little less forgiving. Root space is smaller, moisture swings faster, nutrients can run short sooner. Container tomatoes often benefit from more attention to structure because they can turn overcrowded quickly, but they also stress faster if you overdo it. So in pots, I would rather see steady light management than dramatic pruning days. Keep the plant breathable, remove what is clearly unhelpful, maintain support, but protect enough foliage to buffer heat and keep the plant working. Container tomatoes punish extremes. For paste tomatoes and some compact varieties, restraint matters even more. Many of them set fruit in a more concentrated way, and overpruning can quietly cost you a lot. This is where gardeners sometimes copy advice meant for big, indeterminate slicing tomatoes and apply it everywhere. That is how harvests shrink. The plant type, fruiting habit, and growth style all matter. When in doubt, prune less and observe more. You can always remove a sucker next week. You cannot glue a fruiting stem back on after a confident mistake. And let me say something that relieves a lot of pressure. Perfect pruning is not required for a good tomato crop. Tomatoes are generous plants. They can forgive a fair amount of clumsy handling and still feed you well. That is good news. But the difference between random cutting and thoughtful pruning is still real. Thoughtful pruning improves air movement, keeps plants manageable, helps support do its job, and reduces wasted energy in places that do not serve your harvest. It does not require obsession, it requires attention. That is a much more realistic standard. So when you walk out to prune, do not ask, what can I cut? Ask, what is this plant trying to become, and what is getting in the way? That question changes the whole mood. You stop treating the plant like a problem to be controlled and start treating it like a system to be understood. You look for lower leaves at risk, you look for suckers headed into congestion, you look for fruit that needs shade, stems that need support, and interiors that need breathing room. Every cut begins to have a reason behind it. That is really the deeper skill underneath all of this. Not tomato pruning by rote, but pattern recognition. The more often you study living plants without rushing, the less dependent you become on one-size-fits-all advice. You start noticing which varieties stay healthy with more foliage, which ones turn into thickets overnight, which corners of your garden stay damp longest, and which supports are always a little too weak by July. Those observations are worth more than a stack of generic instructions. They turn gardening from imitation into judgment. And judgment is what gives you better yield in the long run. Not because you become strict, but because you become accurate. You waste less growth. You protect more useful growth. You catch problems sooner. You stop making cuts just to satisfy your eye, and you start making cuts that help fruit, airflow, support, and plant health work together. That is what experienced growers are really doing. They are not following a magic formula. They are reading the plant in front of them and acting with purpose. So the next time you stand there with pruners in hand, remember the simple checks. Know what kind of tomato you have. Find the main stem, flower clusters, and suckers. Judge space 2 weeks ahead. Open the interior without stripping the plant naked. Clean up the lower leaves when the plant is ready. Match your pruning to vigor, season, and support. And if you are unsure, make one careful cut instead of 10 nervous ones. Confidence grows that way, quietly, honestly, one right decision at a time. One more test helps when a plant has gotten ahead of you and you dread looking at it. Do not try to fix the whole thing in one pass. Stand back first and find 3 categories only. What is dead or diseased? What is rubbing, crowded, or trapped in the center? And what is healthy but optional? The first category goes first. The second category gets judged next. The third category is where patience belongs. That order keeps you from making emotional cuts. When people panic prune, they often remove the healthy but optional growth before they address the truly problematic parts. Then they step back, realize the plant still has poor airflow in the middle, and now they have taken away useful leaves for nothing. There is a reason experienced gardeners often prune in shorter visits instead of turning it into one dramatic event. A tomato plant tells the truth better when you keep returning to it. You notice how quickly a sucker reappears. You notice whether a variety handles dense foliage well or starts spotting leaves after a wet spell. You notice whether your cage is losing the fight. These are not glamorous observations, but they save crops. They keep you from treating every tomato like every other tomato. Even in the same bed, one plant may want a firmer hand while the one beside it needs you to back off and let it leaf out. Another thing worth watching is where flower clusters sit in relation to foliage. Beginners sometimes remove leaves around blossoms because they want everything visible, but visibility is not the goal. Function is the goal. Blossoms and young fruit benefit from a plant that can feed them steadily. If you strip too many leaves around active fruiting trusses, the plant still has tomatoes, but it has less working surface to support them. Think of pruning as directing labor, not eliminating workers. You want enough structure to keep energy moving, enough openness to keep the plant dry, and enough cover to protect the fruit during heat. When all 3 are present, the plant usually tells you so with growth and cleaner leaves. And if you are ever unsure whether you have gone too far, the plant will show you within days. A well-pruned tomato looks alive, balanced, and ready to grow. The stems make sense. Light reaches in, but the fruit is not glaring in full exposure. New growth continues. A badly overpruned plant often looks startled. Too much bare stem, too much exposure, too little engine left to run the whole machine. That visual difference is worth learning once, because after you see it, you stop chasing the neat look and start aiming for the healthy look. Those are not always the same thing. That may be the most useful lesson in the subject. Your best pruning guide is not a rule shouted from a seed packet or a clip grabbed from somebody else's garden. It is the plant in front of you, growing in your weather, in your soil, with your support system, under your care. Learn to read that plant honestly, and you will make cleaner cuts later. And better cuts mean healthier vines, less frustration, cleaner airflow, and a harvest that feels earned, not accidental. Once you reach that point, you are no longer following tomato advice. You are growing tomatoes with your judgment. If you grow tomatoes, I would love to know what kind of pruner you are. Do you keep them lean and disciplined, or do you let them get a little wild and only step in when the plant tells you it needs help? Climate changes the answer. Variety changes the answer. Even the way you support them changes the answer. That is why this is such a good garden conversation. There is real room for experience here. And if you have ever regretted a hard pruning job, you are certainly not the only one. The good news is you do not need a perfect system. You need eyes, patience, and a little nerve. Tomatoes reward people who pay attention, not people who chase every rule, and not people who cut just to feel busy. So trust what you see. Learn the plant, not just the advice. And once you do, pruning stops being one more chore on the list and starts becoming what it should have been all along. A simple, practical act of helping a food plant do its best work in your care. That is when the whole garden starts teaching you back.